Hi, I'm Paul Robinson.
Hi, I'm Matt Murray, and this is a special podcast to mark 25 years of show racism, the red card.
25 years ago. That's a long time ago. Probably.
I can remember what Robbo was doing 25 years ago, because he played for Leeds United youth, and I was playing for Wolves. And we had a game at our, you know what I'm going to say, don't you?
I remember this.
We had a game against Leeds, and Robbo was in goal in the first half. The second half, I swear it was Alan Smith and Paul Robinson up front, and Robbo took the centre, and we're only 14, 15, and he shot from the halfway line because he had a massive kick then even. And I remember that's when he first came on my radar. And obviously then a few years later, Smudger and Robbo playing in Leeds United first team. But yeah, so I reckon about 25 years ago, we'd have been playing against each other around that time, and obviously dreaming about becoming professional footballers.
I must have realised there was a dodgy goalie at the other end.
Yeah, luckily I was on my line. But do you remember that game now?
I remember it, yeah. I remember it really well, yeah. I don't know why. Yeah. What happened? We must have been short of players or something. I really can't remember how that happened.
Yeah, I don't know either, but just remember you've been on fire in the first half up front. In goal. And the next thing you're up front, spraying it around, shooting, everything. I was like, wow.
I wasn't a bad player. There was only one thing that stopped me being a striker, mate. It was about 2.5 stone.
Yeah, Akin Fenwer. Nah, okay, yeah. So look, 25 years ago at school, and yeah, do you know what? I experienced some racism. I still had a wicked childhood. I had an amazing childhood, but I was growing up in Lichfield. I used to get the bus to Wolves if my parents couldn't take me, and I was in the Centre of Excellence. And I don't know about you, Robbo, I just wanted to try and get an ex-schoolboy contract, and then you're desperate to get the YTS contract and hope to get into some England trials, stuff like that, really.
It was the YTS one that I remember well when we were kids. I mean, you get your schoolboy forms, and then it was as cutthroat and as brutal as you turned up for training one night. If you walked out of the tracksuit, you were in. If you didn't, you were out, kind of thing. Yeah. And that was that was the shape of the rest of your life, whether you were going to get a contract after school. I remember I left school at 16. I got some decent qualifications. I got all my GCSEs, but I left school at 16 for £37.50 a week on a whim and a prayer, hoping that I could be a footballer.
I think that there was a lot of ignorance back then. If you look at things, even how we were spoken to. So just there, how Robbo was, I can remember the same, whether you got your YTS contract or not. That wouldn't happen now, because you care about people's mental health and young kids and their dreams being shattered. And it's the same when you played. Certain things were said to me that I don't know, obviously, Robbo, you're white. I was told as a young black man, being 6'5" and black, that was an advantage because you could intimidate white people. That's what we were told as young players. You could intimidate white people being big and black and you'd be powerful. When I was younger, I mean, Wolves never said it or anything like that, but some people were like, oh, you're a goalkeeper, a black goalkeeper. Like, how's that? You're quick and you do this and that. So and then when I did play up front, obviously I'm talking about Robbo playing up front, but when I used to play up front, people used to say he's like, off a shovel, literally. And people start giggling and comments like that. People stamping on my toes when I was a young kid coming through because there weren't any other black players in the league. And all those things were taught. I remember certain games where I got nothing off the referee. So 100%, there was things that were said. There were also joke comments. I remember probably just, not quite 25 years ago, but a few years after that, there was a real fashion. A lot of black lads had blonde hair. You dyed your hair blonde. And the amount of people used to call you a pint of Guinness. Someone pick up that pint of Guinness or this and that. And people would just laugh. They should be coming shouting off the sideline. So you wouldn't, the things that you wouldn't say now, there's words that I used to use as a young kid growing up that I would cringe now, or if I used them in the media, you wouldn't see me again. We didn't order a Chinese takeaway. I don't know if I can say it on here. We would say we're going for a chinky. That's what we would say. And you didn't mean to offend anybody, but actually you look back at it, and it wasn't until somebody educated me and said, I wouldn't use that expression if I was you, Matt. If you use that around the wrong people, it could look the wrong way. And you're like, okay, well, it didn't mean anything. So 100% perceptions, language that's being used, stereotypes, people have tried to address that. But that was something that I experienced growing up.
The world has definitely been educated. It's definitely moved on. You talk about when we were kids. I was from a rural area, Yorkshire, and went to school in a town where there was one black girl in the whole town, and that was my experience of her upbringing. And there was no kind of racial abuse or name calling towards her or anything, but it was just a rarity for where I was. And when we were in the youth team at Leeds, we'd play against other teams who had black kids in. And I was quite fortunate that I left home, I say, when I was 16, and I wouldn't say my eyes were opened, and you're a lot more open and accepting of other races, of other people, other cultures, other nationalities. And it's never been an issue for me. You've seen it, and you've seen it from an outside looking in. But I think the world as a whole, we're being educated. There's a lot of people that are having to learn quickly. And like what Matt said, then words that were acceptable that just slipped off the tongue years ago. We and Matt work in the media now. You're one word away from never working again. And you've got to be very, very careful with what you say and how you address different situations, because, Matt touched on mental health and the way people are. And, the education now is vitally important for us to get to a stage of where we're at now.
But Robert, when I was at Wolves, we had I was really fortunate. We had black coaches. We had a really diverse coaching, coaches there. And one was the ex-Leeds player, Terry Connor. So he was fantastic for us, and he would come and speak to us and let us know sometimes so when he came through, he used to have to put his moisturizing cream on in the back room. Everybody has wash bags now, but then creaming your skin is like what you're doing, people would say that black players couldn't play in the cold. So he taught us, some of the things. No one will ever not pick you because you're black. They won't say that. And there was always a saying, oh, you're on black man time, you come late, and those sort of things were acceptable. So again, we had to make sure he just keep drilling it into us all the time. Be early for meetings, you don't come out in like loads of layers and that, because people think, oh, you're not up for it in the cold. Anything like that he went through, he would teach us these things. So then when we went away with England and stuff like that, and when it came from him, it resonated a lot more, because he always used to say, look, he flew the flag for his generation and the abuse he took, even off some of his own fans, and then suddenly did well, and they start singing Terry Connor's one of our own and all that. And he educated us. But there were so many times, there was one lad of ours who couldn't deal with it. So if anything was said to us on the pitch, my way of dealing with it, because I dealt with it from the age of 9, was I rolled up my sleeves and I went harder. I wanted to play hard. I wanted to win more. He used to lash out, and he was sent off. And when Terry Connor pulled him in and had the chat with him, he then went on and had a career. And I don't think if it had come from a white coach, I don't think it would have been quite the same. But everyone was saying that this lad had a chip on his shoulder because he got reacted to be calling the N-word and this and that. So look, I took it off the other way as well, because I'm adopted. So I'm brought up by 2 white parents. So sometimes the black lads used to call me a coconut. So I used to get that side as well. So there was a lot for me growing up as a young man, identifying with myself. But I do believe that just especially when I was leaving school, black culture was becoming really, really cool with the music, the food. And there was a lot of, sporting icons, especially in movie stars and music, and everyone that you could really relate to. So I did start to feel definitely a change, and being black was, to a lot of people, was very, very cool.
One of the best coaches that I had was the youth team in the academy at Leeds. They say there's a shortage of black coaches now, which has been addressed. But Cess Pod, I don't know if you remember him, a guy called Cess Pod used to play at a certain level, and he was my youth team coach, which, as you say, in those days was a rarity in the academy. Probably from the age of 13 to 15, a guy called Cess Pod, and he could still play, and the respect that he had among the lads. And there was no racism. There was no, oh, he's black, he's not as good a coach as anybody else. We kind of respected it. My first real dealings with racism in sport was when I was very young. My granddad used to take me to watch rugby league, which, as we know, is a working class sport. And in Hull, it was a Hull KR game. Was it Hull KR? I can't remember. But Martin Afire, it must have been Wigan, because Martin Afire was playing. And the old Hull FC ground was the Boulevard. And the small-minded, narrow-minded abuse. There's a stand called the Chicken Room. And we stood next to it. I always remember it as a kid with my granddad. I mean, this was going back a long time ago. And they'd throw bananas at Martin Afire as he ran down the wing. And actually, my granddad identified with me then. And you knew that was completely wrong. You knew that was completely unacceptable and wrong. And that was my first ever dealing with any kind of racism in sport and people's small-minded mentality. And, we talk about development and where we've gone from that day to now, but we're still seeing, signs of racism, not obviously to that extent, but that was the first real time that I went to sport and I didn't want to go again. I didn't like it. I hated it. Not to mention like the old man's mentality, the smoky atmosphere is stood there in a rugby stand, but the stuff that was being said and what was being done at that young age, I could identify that I didn't like it and I hated it. Grown men seem to think it's their right to get into a football stadium and say what they like. It's actually quite funny when you're playing goal, because if you go behind the goal and pick up a ball for a goal kick and you just catch somebody's eye, somebody will say some horrible abuse at you. You'll just look up and you'll catch their eye, you'll look them straight in the eye, and they'll just sit down like a naughty kid and go, oh, and like, they're really embarrassed because you've caught them. And the football stadium, the arena of a football stadium, seems to give not just grown men, but anybody, they think it's a green light to go in there and shout what they want or can say what they want at somebody. Whereas if you were walking in the street and they had their kid with them or you had your child with you, they'd walk across the road, shake your hand and ask for a picture. They wouldn't dare say anything to you. But a football arena, even now, seems to give people a license where they think that they can be a different person to the one that they are at home. Yes, we are getting there. We are educating people slowly. But I think the fact that we're still talking about black people and black coaches, the day we talk about players and coaches is the day that there isn't a problem.
But Robbo, for me, obviously, when I was stood in goal and I used to hear, I used to hear the single voice. That was the one that I used to hear more. There's that one voice that would come out and say stuff. I know exactly what you mean when you go behind to get the ball from behind the goal. I remember one geezer to try to throw the ball right in my face as hard as he could, and I just caught it. Luckily, it was just a little bit low, and I caught it. Just give him a little smile, and then Carl Ikemi got it really, really badly playing away at Walsall, just from a select little area. But when he reported it, he was made to feel like he was guilty because they couldn't prove who said it. And then Walsall's a fantastic club. There's loads of clubs like Millwall do loads of amazing things. But sometimes when, there's Wolves fans that have, I know have been ejected for race abuse. It's just, there are a few people that do it. But I always feel that
the majority, isn't it?
Yeah, but I feel that when a club is accused of it, then it becomes a bit tribal and people try and protect themselves. Instead of saying, yeah, it was those two, I heard them. It was, it's only those two, let's out them. It becomes sometimes people get a bit protective of it. But for me, I remember when we played Cyprus away for England under 16s and we were getting racist abuse off the Cyprus players. And they were in our hotel with us all week leading up to the game. But because we were beating them by so much, they didn't know what else to say. Then at the end of the game, they want to swap shirts. They're shaking hands again. Oh, we didn't mean any of that. We're just trying to put you off. And it was like, hang on a minute. No. You can say with this and that, but not our colour. That's not acceptable. And they didn't realise it. And like some people go, oh, well, you could call me a white this and a white that. I wouldn't care. And like, no. It isn't like that. So, but I always feel that when I was younger, obviously the amount of teams that, when I used to play for England in the 21s, most of the team, 5 or 6 of us starting would have been black. When we played in some country, I remember playing on my debut at Slovakia away. It was like there was a stadium of monkeys watching us, but we didn't like think about walking off. We battered them 4-0, but then no one really said anything more. It was like, we've done our job, we get out. Where now I think there'd be a lot more outcry. Do you know what I mean?
I've had that as well on the international front when you go to those places, not mentioning any specific countries, but our team's got 4, 5, 6 black players in it, and racist abuse does happen. And you talk about it in the dressing room and it's kind of, right, that's it, end of, we move on now, we go. Whereas now there's actually an acceptance where, let's walk off the pitch, let's do something about this, which is fantastic. I mean, it's got to a level now where we are able to do that. Teams and managers are taking players off the pitch. So on a smaller scale in San Diego recently, San Diego in the MLS, they're an up and coming team who are trying to make the way through the leagues. And they actually forfeited a playoff game, I think it was, due to homophobic abuse of one of their players, which was, it's a breath of fresh air to see teams doing that. But I, like you, played through the 18s, the 21s, and we had the 21s tournament in Cyprus, pretty similar to you. And it's not just the fans, as you say, it's other players from other teams that are dishing out the abuse as well. Because I think you're right. I just think it's small-minded, uneducated people who can't think of anything better to say to you. Back to what we talk about behind, going behind the goal and stuff and people shouting at you there. My mum always, I remember it once, we were sat at home and we're having Sunday lunch and I think Arsenal on the telly, and I used to hate playing there because I used to get beat all the time and it was Spurs rivals and everything. And I'm watching the telly and I just go, I hope these get beat today. I can't stand this lot. And Mum went, oh, I used to quite like them. I used to quite like going, they always looked after us and this, that and the other. I said, well, you want to hear what they say about you when I go behind the goal? And that just shut her up. And she didn't realise that, you know, it's not a racist abuse, it's a different kind of abuse, but it's still abuse.
Yeah, it's horrendous. But going back to that's why I feel though that football is an amazing platform. It's amazing because everyone watches it all over the world. First my hero was Neville Southall. I believe he was yours as well, Robbo. I think you've said
yes,
that.
Mate.
But for me, then when there was David James and Shaka Hislop, suddenly I looked at some people and thought, they look a bit like me, you know, similar sort of build, you know, obviously J-Mo's the same colour, and you start to relate to people. And then I love doing the show races and the red card workshops going into schools, because as much as we hold up a card on a team photo or wear a t-shirt in a warm-up, I just think when you go in and you work with the young kids, that's the key. You know, that is the key. And you said about your granddad telling you at a rugby league game, it's wrong. Now, how you bring your kids up, that will change it. And if everybody can, the kids, you know, because racism, I really don't believe anybody's born racist. I believe it's taught. So when I was 9 years old at school and some kid would say, you can't play because you're black, that would be it. 9 years old, you can't play because you're black. And the lads would go, he's the best player, he's black, he can't play. That's it. And that used to, honestly, I can still feel it now. Used to make me want to cry, did make me cry. And when you're young and you can't do it, it actually makes you not want to be black, because it's stopping you from doing what everybody else can do. Or if you get chased home from school by all the older kids just because you're black, it's horrendous. But as you get older, you learn to, you know, I'm proud of my color, I love my ethnicity, everything about it. But as I say, education is key going in. And that's why when the young players, or the players, especially the current ones, take that time to walk in, sit down, talk about it, and then make everybody start discussing it. And then if kids do go home and maybe say to their parents, Dad, you shouldn't say this, Mum, you shouldn't say that, older brother, this and that, that's, for me, is like that ripple effect and really starts to change it. And so yeah, so I think football and you know, especially, you know, current players are huge. There's been a lot of talking about it and without meaning to. So, you know, like quite often, you know, black players are talked about with their pace and power. And then when it was actually highlighted, and even though, like, for me, Kante, for example, yes, his energy levels, but his intelligence of how he breaks up play and everything else. And when I played, no one ever really would talk to me about, you know, like, oh, look, he managed the game well today, or he organizes well. It would be, you know, he's 6'5", he comes and eats crosses, he can jump. You know what I mean? It was always that side of it. And I do feel that a lot of times that, you know, especially, you know, as we were coming up, like you said, with the cricket bowler, it's the same with the players. I think that black players are often talked about with their speed and their pace and the power. And don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic attribute to have. But there were some players that are, you know, Thierry Henry, and that, so much of his intelligence as well, and his movement and the way, you know, he did things. So I do feel that people are thinking about it, don't want to stereotype as much. I still feel that there's not only towards black people, but stuff, you know, towards Asian people, there's still a lot of towards Muslims. There's still a lot of words that are said, a lot more. I can remember when we were younger coming through, and if there was someone respecting Ramadan, they wouldn't be treated like they would be now. It'd be understood now. It'd be tolerated now. So 100% people have moved forward. Education's key. Just and realizing, you know what, bringing everybody together is just amazing. That's what makes football, the Premier League, life exciting. And when I do the show racing the red card workshops, and you sit there with the kids and you go, oh, what food do you like? Oh, I like hot dogs, I like pizzas, I like pasta, I like Chinese takeaway. All right, okay, all those cultures. If you went to a firework display, what would you think if every rocket was the same? It's boring. Okay, but if you've got all different color fireworks and this and that, and that's a bit like the human, you know what I mean, like how it is with the human race. We're all, you know, we all bleed, we all have emotions and this and that. And when you start the debates, the kids, for me, are just amazing. And I think that's really start to feed into football, and it's feed into the media, as I say, and people really starting to think about it. But something that really winds me up is when, I mean, I can hear Robbo talking now, and is when people say, oh, white people can't talk about how black people feel. Well, no, maybe you don't always know, you haven't experienced it, but there's still, that's why I think like show racing red card, kick it out, Black Lives Matter. This is a fight against racism. So it's everybody against racism. And I, you know, and I think, again, when I've I had a lot of amazing white in my life, if that makes sense. I'm adopted by white people. And so it really annoys me when people say, oh, white people can't empathize. I think it's everybody, and everyone's sort of into this fight against racism. That's my opinion.
Do you know what gets me? What really annoys me? The top football governing bodies, the FIFAs and UEFAs of this world, when you see the amount of racism that goes on in stadiums and personal abuse for players, and players will get banned for 5 matches and fined 10 grand. Whereas if they have a bet on the horses or another football team, they'll get banned for 20 matches and fined 20 grand. Their punishments for racism are absolutely pathetic, in my opinion. The stuff that we've seen, making teams play behind closed doors. So what? How does that affect them? That doesn't affect them. Punish them, ban them from a competition, make them realise, educate people, make people realise it's not in these countries that we saw when we saw England players suffering the terrible racist abuse. I think that they were made to play behind closed doors for 3 games and fined 100 grand. On the grander scale of things, so what? What's that? What's that doing? How is that educating anybody? Ban players, ban teams, and really make a stand. And that's when people will start, taking notice. You look at the Leeds goalkeeper, Cassia, was found guilty of racism in a Charlton game. I think he was banned for 10 games and fined a couple of weeks' wages. I think that's completely unacceptable. I think that the club stood by him and they kind of brushed it under the carpet. I don't see why the potential that he shouldn't have lost his job for something like that. And I think that the fines and punishments are terrible in comparison to other offences.
What do you think? I don't know if you've done your coaching badges, but I've done my coaching badges. And then when I was trying to do a diversity workshops for players, and the way, look, clubs do loads of amazing work, but I still feel on the coaching badges, there should be, more talk about racism and language you can and can't use. So then there's no excuse. Do you know what I mean? You've been taught about it. You've done the workshop. You tick that box. Then I think as players, when I used to go in and try and do the diversity training, so it wasn't only about racism, it was about all forms of discrimination. I think players should have to do that every 3 years minimum. So they're up to speed, talking about it, social media, this, and this, because the amount of times you could, there was incidents, there was a player whose child was disabled and somebody else, while they were playing, someone missed a chance and they made a comment about disability. And the player that was made to didn't take any offense, but the person who's got a disabled child is like, whoa, you can't say that. Do you know what I'm saying? Because, and it's again, like when I talk about when I've married into white families, and my in-laws now would feel a lot different when they hear racist comments before I came into the family, because there is black blood in their grandchildren. So the thought that their grandchildren could be affected and discriminated against just because they've got black blood in them, then they start to realize actually it resonates deeper, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm trying to say everybody is into this fight against, whether it's homophobic comments, discrimination about disability, age, I don't know, all these different things, and that's what I think is key. But I agree with you, Robbo, punishment's got to fit the crime, education's got to be massive. But if people are doing regular courses and getting educated regularly, how can you say, oh, I didn't know this, I didn't know that? I think maybe the first time, if it's just an ignorant one, should be a fine and a suspension, but you get so many warnings, and then people got to really lose jobs, be on records like a criminal record, and people really pay for it.
I think it's a generational thing as well. And I think the whole thing, the whole key to this is education. If you're educating kids now at schools, in academies, from 10 downwards or 15 downwards, whatever it is, the generation of my grandparents, their grandparents, where there was an underlying element of racism, that generation is now moving on. There's still an element of that now, the older generation that we've seen in football stadiums, but it's the next 2 or 3 generations that I think the campaigns are about. Okay, so there's the kick racism, show racism, red card, kick it out, the Black Lives Matter campaigns, badges, stickers, but actions have to be done. We have to go into these places, educate the kids, and it's the generations that are coming through that are going to live with this for the rest of their life, and they're the ones that are going to be able to make the change.
I think we're definitely moving in the right direction. Say I mentioned Terry Connor and where things were then to where they are now. I feel that mine and Robbo's generation, so black players of our generation are going to be flying the flag for the coaches. I think black players now are very, very, it's commonplace, it's accepted, it's, very, very well respected. Still stuff that goes on in social media and on terraces needs to be improved. I think the social media companies within 10 years will be much more accountable. I think within the next year or two, they will be. Otherwise, I think people will move away from the big companies now and set up new ones and say, right, you can only be on this if you do give your passport details, your address and everything else. I think those things will happen. I think you probably, we've seen a black president, so we're going to see a black England coach, things like that. I can't think of any other black goalkeepers apart from David James, who's played in England seniors. So I think there'll be things like that will change. And on the terraces, but I still feel for it to be totally gone in 10 years is a big ask. But I feel that there'll be so many countries now, like Robbo's saying, not just a slap on the wrist, 100 grand, 3 games. No, you will be really, really shunned if you carry out any sort of discrimination, any sort of abuse. So I feel there will be more black coaches, more black media, everything, and just a more diverse and equal opportunity. But that's all you're asking for. All I ask for, I don't want to be given anything because of my color. I just want equality. That's all. Then judge me. And if, judge me the same as, as you judge Robbo or you judge somebody else, that's all I'd want if I was, in whatever job I go for. But if I haven't got the qualifications, if I'm not good enough, or if I don't interview as well, no problem. But give me the opportunity and take me for me. Don't just, brush me aside because of my color, or don't just give me an interview, tick the box, but he was never getting it.
I just think in 10 years' time, as Matt says, it's a big ask. If we're where we want to be and where we need to be. As I said before, it's a generational thing. I think when we actually get to the point where it's not discussed, we're not having to have Black Lives Matter campaigns, we're not having to show racism, the red card campaigns. When we get to a point where everybody is the same, which is, that's in the future, at whatever point that may be, I think that's when you can say we've finally achieved what we want to. It's come a hell of a long way in the last 25 years where we started this conversation to where we are today. The education, the realization, and the knowledge of people, that the understanding of situations has hugely improved. And I don't think we can say that we're finally there until there is, it's not a question of Black Lives Matter or, kick racism out. It's everybody is exactly on an even keel.